Hi, everyone, and welcome to Alpine Intel's Savvy Adjuster podcast, where we discuss the property loss topics important to adjusters with the experts who know them best. I'm your host, Chris Nichols, a senior account manager here at Alpine Intel. If you don't already know, Alpine Intel is an industry leader in property assessments through our operating brands, which are HVACI, Strike Check, National Fire Experts, Donut Engineering, and the Component Testing Laboratory. You can always find out more information about these service offerings and additional resources at our website, alpineintel.com, linked in the show notes. So we're here to share key points with insurance professionals about a variety of property topics, including today's focus, which is large loss fire investigations. A quick disclaimer before we get started. We're going to be talking today in general investigation and insurance terms. As you know, each claim is unique, which is why it is so important to get an assessment to make sure you have the facts that you need. Today, I am joined by lead fire experts Sean Williams and Jim Sealer, both with National Fire Experts, formerly of Donan Fire Investigations. Thanks to the both of you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, Sean, let's start with you before we dive into the meat of the episode. Can you tell me a little bit about your professional experience with Donan / National Fire Experts, and then also before your time here?
Sure. I've been with National Fire Experts for 5 years. I came on in 2019. At the time, I was still involved in public safety side of the business, and I transitioned to full-time in 2020. And I have been promoted to lead fire investigator. I've done over 1,000 fire investigations over my career, spanning, 27, 28 years now in the business.
Awesome. And Jim, same question to you, but tell us a little bit about your background as well.
I have been with National Fire Experts since 2016, going on 8 years now. So prior to that, I had full careers in the military and on the public side in law enforcement, like Sean. As well, I've probably got over a couple of thousand fire and explosion investigations under my belt throughout my 25-year career. And with National Fire Experts, I also work as a lead investigator out in the West region of the United States.
Awesome. Well, you guys have thousands more fire investigations than I do. I'm at 0 currently, so I think we're in good hands here today. And thanks again to the both of you for taking time out of what I can only imagine is a busy schedule to join us today. And let's dive right in. So, Jim, I will ask you the first question here. Keeping in mind that each claim and assessment is unique, what constitutes a large loss, and really what elements might make it different from a standard residential or commercial claim?
Well, Chris, each stakeholder and client, carrier, or law firm may interpret what a large loss means differently, and it can be based on a number of different factors, but primarily we focus that on the need for specialized equipment, the need to bring in multiple outside vendors and multiple different interested parties. Additionally, you may find factors such as the dollar value of the loss or reserve set aside by a client to constitute large versus smaller. And then other things that factor in oftentimes are injuries, fatalities, if that's a part of the loss, as well as possibly environmental factors, governmental jurisdictional demands and requirements. And it may even delve into, on the commercial side or industrial side, the amount of business revenue or income that may be affected as a result of this loss. So again, it's very unique to each entity, but those are the primary focuses when they make that interpretation.
Sure. Sean, anything to add that Jim didn't mention?
No, Jim covered it pretty well. I would say that most large loss fires are complex fire incidents, right? They're not your typical residential house fire or, small commercial fire. They're usually a complex fire requiring a lot of specialized expertise, not only from the fire investigation side, but also the resources you bring into that investigation. So it's a lengthy, usually a front-loaded type of an investigation where there's a lot of legwork and a lot of background information gathering prior to even starting the investigation. But for the most part, it's just a complex fire investigation above and beyond what you normally deal with on a day-to-day basis.
And is there, with it being such a larger, well, no pun intended, but a larger loss, is there typically more than one fire investigator that goes out there, or is one, investigator pretty much in charge of the entire scene, if you will?
Initially, it's probably just the first fire investigator, the one that's contracted by the property owner or the company that had the large loss. But as the investigation develops, you're sometimes getting multiple investigators, 20, 30. I've had joint studies with as many as 40 fire investigators, attorneys, engineers, all party to the loss in some form or capacity, depending on what their vested interest in the loss is. So it can grow exponentially depending on the size of the loss.
Sure. Yeah, I had no idea that there would be so many people involved, but I should have assumed with the again the name of a large loss. So so Sean, I'll stay with you here for the next question. So what kind of, we just talked about the amount of personnel that may be on there, but what kind of personnel, either on the assessment partner side or anyone outside of the industry, can you expect to work with during these claims?
I think the first people you're going to work with are going to be the actual adjuster from the company that hired you, as well as their law firm. If they have a subrogation law firm or liability law firm, you're going to work with their attorneys right away. And as the process develops, you're going to reach out to the local authorities. They're going to have a vested interest in this because it was a large loss in their community. So you could have local, state, and even national government involved, depending on how large the loss is. At that point, you're going to reach out to you're going to have everything from structural engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical, depending on the nature of the loss. Some losses require heavy equipment. You're going to need heavy equipment, operators for that heavy equipment, securing the scene. So there's a multitude of other agencies and other players that are going to come into these large loss fires as the building blocks start to add up, right? You start off with just yourself and maybe an engineer to look at it, and the point of contact at that loss location. And as it grows and develops, you start realizing more players are involved. Those parties all start to come into the mix as well.
And is the point of contact, you mentioned the point of contact at the loss location, are they typically in charge of, not corralling people is not the wrong word, but keeping everybody, track of everybody and kind of dictating what happens next? Or how does that typically work on a claim site?
So the point of contact is usually just who's in charge of that facility. So if it's, let's say it's a multifamily apartment complex, it may be the property manager that would be the point of contact. As the process goes, though, as the lead investigator on this large loss, you're going to become the main point of contact for all additional resources coming into the mix. You're going to manage those resources, schedule those resources, account for those resources, and make sure that all those resources have been notified through the attorney or through the adjuster that they're all aware of dates, times, places that things are going to take place.
Sure. Is there a specific way you prepare yourself to interact with others on the claim side, especially, when there may be different interested parties involved?
I think it's starting off with a open mind that you're here to find the truth. You're truth seeking on what caused this. You're not the only interested party. So you build these relationships up over time, right? You do these large loss fires, you do even small residential fires, and you've built these relationships with other investigators, with other contractors, with engineers. So everybody's got the ultimate same goal, and that is to just find out what caused this fire and how can we mitigate this ever happening again down the road, right? You're trying to learn from past lessons. So I think for the most part, just having an open mind, listening to other people's inputs, and just trying to do a thorough job throughout the investigation.
Sure. Jim, how about yourself? How do you prepare yourself to interact with, a multitude of people on a claim site?
Well, I concur with everything Sean just touched on. That I will stress again that it's vitally important that your lead investigator or the entity that the adjuster puts in charge of their loss be very experienced and competent as it relates to leadership, collaboration, sharing, knowing what they can share and what they should share and what they should not share. It's very important to have an individual that's highly organized, highly experienced. Oftentimes, Sean and I will go to losses on projects where the other individuals we're working with we've known for decades and have worked numerous successful projects with them. So there's an understanding, there's a level of knowledge about not only what your capabilities are, but what your opposing interests and other investigators need to know as well, so that you can work together as a team. Even though you may have competing interests, you still need to work as a team to avoid duplication of effort, to avoid costly delays, and making sure that there's adherence to protocols, budgetary constraints, and other issues that are paramount to answering the questions that your adjuster may have, so that they can do their job. So communication, sharing, and collaboration are all very important.
Sure. And it sounds like you've got a lot of different personalities involved as well. So knowing these people for 10, 20 years, you kind of know what to expect and how to interact with them. And I'm sure that certainly helps as well. So,
Absolutely.
so Jim, we'll stay with you. If I'm an adjuster with a large loss claim, right? What are specific things that I should look for in an assessment partner?
You want an assessment partner and investigator that has a proven track record of not only being certified to do the job, but has the qualifications to take the project from its inception and to successfully help the client or adjuster navigate to a successful outcome, even if it involves subrogation or litigation. You want an individual that has skills for communicating in a timely manner and working with multiple independent parties, as you touched on earlier, that have competing interests, sometimes competing personalities, sometimes competing agendas for that matter. And it's important to have an individual that's a leader that can bring everybody together in search of the truth and to get there without delay. As Sean touched on at the outset of the presentation, oftentimes these complex large losses are very heavily front-loaded with the need for extremely immediate response for scene preservation and evidence preservation, and to collaborate with the public entity, whether it's a fire department or law enforcement agency that may have control of the scene at that time. Just because they have control doesn't mean that you can't communicate with them and get as much information on the front end as possible, so that when the scene is released by the fire department or law enforcement agency, we as private investigators can immediately step in seamlessly with no delay.
Sean, anything to add, piggyback off of what Jim just mentioned?
Yeah, I think Jim hit it on the head. You want to have a quality fire investigator, but also a quality company, right? You want a national presence. Large loss fires sometimes are, national companies where they have multiple locations across the country. So having those resources around the country, they're able to step in and help. Maybe an exemplar factory is in a different state where you can have an investigator go to that location and do some footwork for you and get some documentation ahead of time for you. So I think the large company, the national company, is a huge deal on that. And they also have partnerships with other companies, right? When you have a large company nationwide, you're allowed to develop these partnerships with the other entities, the engineers and the heavy equipment operators, and all these resources you may need. So I think for the adjuster, the big thing is to have that point of contact before it happens to determine who they want to use and have that large loss investigation team developed in their mind, so that when the call comes in, they had a large loss, they're ready to roll with it.
Yep. Makes sense. I would imagine, and I'm learning more and more about fire losses every day here, but I would imagine that time to site is pretty critical for fire losses as well, correct?
Absolutely. It's vitally important that the response be as fast as possible, because every minute that goes by, you can have a negative effect on evidence or the scene with patterns and potential witness availability. Weather factors may get involved. And on top of all of that, it takes time, as Sean mentioned, to coordinate the presence of dozens of people sometimes. These scenes, depending on the size of the footprint of the property, you can have hundreds of people, hundreds, lawyers, engineers, investigators, witnesses, contractors, needing to get in there, wanting to get in there, and the individual entity or company hopefully a large company that has experience to carry these things from beginning to end, is who the adjuster client has in their little Rolodex or checklist of a phone call and a selected vendor to go with immediately, because the quicker they do that, the quicker the investigator can respond, and the quicker the truth will be shared with all the interested parties. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to know the truth. They want to know what happened so that they can move forward with the claim process. And oftentimes, successful subrogation is a direct correlation to the efficiency and speed in which the investigation is taken care of at the beginning.
You mentioned something too that more a curiosity question on my end than anything, but say a fire event happens, a claim is submitted, but then weather happens, right? Rain, hail, wind. How do you preserve that evidence without it being destroyed? What are some ways on site that people have kind of preserved that evidence so you can then go out and do a review of it?
Oftentimes, weather factors make it so that you have to postpone or delay access. But oftentimes, a good investigator is going to, in the instance where Sean works in the country and where I work in the country, we both got extensive experience working in not only hot weather, but cold weather operations. So depending on which it is, if it's a cold weather climate, you may need to access tents, tarps, covers, torpedo heaters, other things to make it such that the investigation can move forward. And likewise, in the alternative, if it's a warm or very hot climate, you need to plan ahead accordingly with taking care of the physical needs of the personnel present, whether it be food, shelter, heating, water, hydration, vehicles, sites to get out of the weather if it becomes too extreme. But oftentimes, weather is something that we adapt to on the fly. We're prepared for that. We expect that, so that when it does show up, we immediately pivot and keep moving forward in the same speed and just make the adjustments accordingly with our adjuster for cost factors or specialized equipment needs.
I appreciate you giving me a little bit more knowledge. I assumed it wasn't just as simple as throwing a blue tarp over something.
Unfortunately not.
Yeah. So Sean, we'll go back to you on this next question. So are there causes of loss that are unique to large loss claims, or at least more likely to be determined as the cause of loss?
Yeah. I don't think so. Origin and cause is, it's going to be very similar between residential, commercial, and large loss fires. The losses are a fuel package was present and ignition source ignited that fuel package, right? So the cause of a fire is pretty much the same. You've got electrical, mechanical, you got nature, you've got, those kind of things. I think where the large loss fires deemed different is the amount of evidence gathering that has to take place, right? The faster, like Jim said, the faster you get out to that site, the faster you're able to secure that site with fencing or some other means to preserve that lost location, the faster you're able to document events leading up to that fire. What was going on? Was the place in operation? Was it idled? Was it closed for the weekend? How many, if it's a multifamily type of a thing, how many families or how many units were in that building? How many people are occupied versus unoccupied? So all that data gathering, video stuff gets deleted quickly, right? Some of that stuff gets written over within days of recording. So getting out there to get video evidence. A lot of your large loss places have some kind of a monitoring system, fire alarms, smoke alarms, fire suppression system. So getting all that documentation. I think that's where you're going to get a successful outcome of determining the cause of a fire, is by getting out there rapidly and starting to assess the situation from basically day one. But as far as what causes these fires, I don't think there's anything different per se than your typical fire. It's just a larger scale and a lot more evidence to sift through, filter through, and more square footage to cover.
Sure. Jim, anything to add on Sean's answer?
With regards to Where I tend to notice a little bit of a difference, if there is any, isn't so much with the types of causes of the fires, like Sean said, because oftentimes that's very scientific. It's very very similar in nature to what brings on the event. Where I find the large loss, complex loss factor differs is with witnesses. Oftentimes with these larger losses, you're correspondingly going to have more witnesses and more interested parties and more individuals that you need to talk to right away. As we all know, your memory does not improve over time generally. So the quicker that you can get these first-in firefighter interviews, your neighborhood canvas interviews, your employees, ownership, everyone that has a stake in the outcome of this loss or an interest, the quicker you get the statement from them, and oftentimes when we can, we try to record that as well for posterity and future need. But the quicker you get that statement, the more accurate it will be generally, and the more helpful it'll be.
Well, Jim, if you don't mind, walk us through an average large loss assessment. And I use average loosely. I know they're all unique, but once National Fire Experts gets the assignment, we receive that in from the adjuster. What are the typical next steps?
Oftentimes, as with National Fire Experts, we already have readily identified individuals in the company that are qualified, experienced, and ready to go with a go bag, so to speak, so that they can be at the site within a 24-hour period, no matter where it's at. We immediately start taking the data that we have available to us. We will do research online on the internet. We will be reaching out to our adjuster immediately to find out the particulars and specific questions and needs they may have, also restrictions or limitations that they may impose on the assignment as well, from a number of different standpoints. There may be individuals that they do not want us to speak with. There may be budgetary constraints, and there also may be multiple factors within the same adjuster or carrier company, where not only will they have first party loss interests, but they may want to explore potential liability interests within the same company. But immediately it puts a series of requirements in motion for Sean and I, where we have to make numerous phone calls, send out numerous emails, do extensive research, and spend a lot of time on the front end preparing and making sure people are available to respond to the lost site. I'm immediately going to begin coordinating with the public agency to determine who is currently in charge of that site, to coordinate with them and find out who is currently in control and find out who will be completing the investigation or report for that public agency, so that we can begin to coordinate and share identities, share timelines of when we and others will be arriving, to coordinate resources, to coordinate making sure that there's no stepping on toes, no interfering in a ongoing public matter, but rather being present to make sure there's a seamless transition. And like we touched on earlier, coordinating all of the necessary resources, equipment, personnel, supplies, and other circumstantial miscellaneous items that may be necessary due to weather, due to location, geography, etc. An example would be if you've got something high up in the mountains where access is going to be extremely difficult. Things like that you need to plan for and be able to adjust on the fly. So communication is paramount, and a lot of it needs to take place on the front end, sometimes many hours of it.
Sure. Anything to add to that, Sean?
Yeah, just real quick, I would touch on the time factor again. When you're dealing with a large loss fire, complex fire, the first 24 to 72 hours are critical in this whole how it's going to play out. If you get behind the game early on, you spend the rest of the investigation trying to play catch up, right? So I think a quick response by the fire investigators, which means a quick call from the adjuster, knowing who they're going to contact right away, getting out to that site within 24 hours. And like Jim said, a lot of witnesses. These witnesses are going to disappear, especially if you have, employees or transient tenants that are looking for other places to live, Red Cross, they're displaced. So trying to track these folks down later on in the process gets to be very difficult. So that initial 24 to 72 hours to get out there, get witness statements, get documentation, get a good overview of what the loss is, evaluate what it's going to take to complete this investigation from beginning to end. If you don't do that quickly, you're constantly playing, catch up and trying to get there. And I've actually not been the lead on a large fire loss claim, but I've had a simple tenant. And I found myself out at that site before the structures insurance has even been out there, the structures investigator. So I get out there looking at my individual tenant's property, and there's a whole complex that's involved. So you never want the smaller interested parties to beat you to the site if you have the large interest overall, right? So again, first 24 to 72 hours, get out there, secure the site, figure out what it's going to take, get your interview process started, witness statements, and you do that, you're going to be ahead of the game the rest of the way through, hopefully.
I have a question for the both of you. Do you have a literal go bag? Is it packed with clean, clothing and deodorant and a toothbrush?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
personally do. Even on smaller case fires that I'm traveling, several hours away, sometimes those fires turn into, I can't complete everything in one day. I'm going to have to do something tomorrow. So I always have a travel bag with me in my truck. That'll get me through a couple days at least. And then there's always a store somewhere down the road to buy what else you don't have. But I do have a go bag in my truck.
Sure. I was just interested. I didn't know if it was just a phrase or an actuality, and it sounds like you guys are prepared. And to piggyback off of that, what's the quickest that you've received a phone call and then been out the door to a claim site? Any stories about, I was out in 30 minutes or,
Definitely under an hour. I keep not only a go bag for a week's worth of necessary supplies and clothing, but I keep a suitcase packed with a similar setup in case I'm unable to travel by vehicle and have to go by air. Oftentimes we are making those decisions on the fly as we're walking out the door, but generally speaking, we as a company, as National Fire Experts, we pride ourselves on being a full service operation from beginning to end. And part of that professionalism means that you're prepared to drop everything in a moment's notice and respond to an emergency that may involve serious injury, maybe some fatalities, maybe multiple structures. Sometimes these large losses, by saying large is doing a disservice to the nature of the loss. Sometimes these events can encompass entire city blocks, entire neighborhoods, where you have evidence that might be miles away from the epicenter or origin of the event due to a number of factors. So it's vitally important to respond immediately, be prepared, and again, that's what we pride ourselves on as individuals that have the experience and knowledge to take part in these investigations and have the privilege of doing so. Part of that responsibility and professionalism involves being ready to go and providing that service to our clients.
And same for you, Sean. I mean, within the matter of an hour, you've been out the door, relatively quickly.
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, typically there's a slight turnaround time by the time the loss is turned into the adjuster. But we have a deal, or we have a goal of 24 hours to 48 hours to get out to a loss location. That's our company standard that we try to meet. So I've been out there within a day. I've actually been out there when the fire investigator is just getting there from the municipality to start his investigation. He's like, "Wow, you're already out here." I'm like, "Yep, they called us last night. We're out here this morning. But do you mind if I help you, or mind if I work with you on this investigation?" So we get out relatively quick, and that's our goal, is to get out there as fast as possible to give the client the best product we can.
Well, that's fantastic. It sounds like we're well equipped as a company at National Fire Experts to get to the site quickly, which is what we've been talking a lot about, right? Is time to site. So that's great. So final question is for you, Jim. I'd love to hear about a real life example of a large loss assessment that you've helped an adjuster out with in the past.
Sure. One that comes to mind is a event that occurred in the northwest part of the United States a few years back. I was the lead investigator. It involved an entire city block plus that was affected dramatically by a fire event in a structure. I responded immediately and knew immediately that this was going to require mass coordination of not only personnel, but equipment and coordination with multiple interested parties due to the numerous businesses that were negatively impacted by the fire. I was able to coordinate with our in-house electrical engineer at the time, who had the dual qualification of being electrical and mechanical certified. He responded with me, and we determined, working together as a team and with all of the other interested parties over the course of many weeks, many separate investigations, because a few times we would have to stop because we'd identify new evidence, and it would require identifying and notifying additional interested parties to be present before we move forward. But that led to a successful determination of the origin and cause of the fire, which led to eventual collection of all of the affected evidence, which was immense and required shipping containers and required all sorts of evidence collection variations and techniques. Secured it all and made arrangements for joint lab studies down the road, which led to our engineer identifying the actual cause of the electrical failure in a sign within a business that led to extreme destruction of multiple properties and activation of fire protection systems and all sorts of additional damage. But due to that finding and involvement and the fact that we handled it so successfully and appropriately right from the beginning, this led to a federal lawsuit filed by our carrier adjuster and his litigation department, which eventually led to reports, a Rule 26 report, and testimony by our engineer, and led to successful subrogation on a high dollar value loss for our client. So that was an example of something we took from the beginning and coordinated it from beginning to end with successful subrogation outcome for our client.
That's awesome. And the main reason you should have a professional organization going out there on your side to do that investigation. You know, it's nice to mention subrogation and leaning on our engineers that we have in-house. That's also another nice thing about National Fire Experts, the ability to pull in some of our engineers, use our loss logistics, evidence management system to get it back to our component testing laboratory. That chain of command isn't broken. So all valuable things. So appreciate you sharing that with me. And how long were you on that specific site? Do you remember how long you were actually involved in that?
Yes, that was over the course of several months. I believe there was probably 4 or 5 separate visits to the site, each time identifying additional parties and additional interested parties that needed to be placed on notice and involved. And not only that, you would oftentimes, as Sean touched on earlier, witness availability. There were circumstances where key witnesses would have things come up in their personal life where, although they had a scheduled appointment, they had to cancel and reschedule. And when you have a significant loss, large complex loss, oftentimes you have to move forward methodically and scientifically. Everything that we do is based on a scientific method. We don't cut corners. We don't move forward with something when it isn't appropriate. We always do things step by step with a purpose. And over the course of a few months, multiple site visits. The case I just mentioned was successfully navigated by our client with their adjuster and with their in-house counsel and with their third-party counsel. And the lawsuit and final outcome for that matter was a few years after the fact, 2 to 3 years later, but successful nonetheless.
Sure. Is it pretty, I'm learning so much about large losses, the amount of people involved, the amount of coordination, sheer coordination. I lost my keys the other day, so I don't think I'm necessarily the best person for that. But as far as time spent on a site, is it a few months pretty average? And I know, again, everything is unique, but is that pretty average? Was that a unique situation being out there for a couple months at that point?
For those large complex losses, the duration of each visit will vary. The case in point that I was discussing, from the initial until the last site inspection or site study, that took place over the course of a few months. But it will vary each time you're required to be there. It could be something as short as a few hours, half a day. And then there's other times where it might be 2 to 3 days at a time, depending on the evidence, depending on how difficult it is to access it, the measures that you may need to take to secure that evidence and transport it, along with other variable factors like personnel, equipment, so on and so forth. But it varies each time.
Sure. Well, I think we are at the tail end, and I just wanted to thank you both again for all the valuable information you shared with me today. I hope the listeners have, I'm sure, learned something. If nothing else, make sure that go bag is packed so you are ready for any situation. I'm going to go after this episode is done and start packing mine right now. But thanks to the listeners. Thank you for joining us today. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast as well so you really never miss an episode. And also, if you have any property claims assessments that need our assistance, head over to alpineintel.com, our website, to submit an assignment, or simply to just get more details about how our suite of services can bring you the answers you need to feel confident about your settlement decisions. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.